Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Melissa DeRosa, Democratic strategist and former secretary under New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Melissa, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Brittany. Great to be here.
Great to have you back. Last night was a historic night, a presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And you posed this question for Democrats. Do we acknowledge the complicated politics of our party and change horses, or crawl back under the covers and pretend it was all a bad dream? What's the answer to that after you see Joe Biden's performance last night?
You know, Brittany, last night there's no sugarcoating this. It was an unmitigated disaster. I mean, from start to finish. And I wrote about this in a piece in the Daily Beast where, literally within minutes of the debate starting, I was getting text messages across my phone, from Democrats in New York and California and swing states all saying, this is an unmitigated disaster. And what do we do? And the only way to change perception is with reality. And the problem is the perception of the electorate is that Joe Biden is too old. And in poll after poll, we see that that is a greater concern to the American public than the fact that Donald Trump is a convicted criminal. And so last night, he had one thing that he had to do, which was present to the extent that he could energetic. There needed to be color in his face. He needed to be coherent. He needed to land a punch or two. And he not only didn't do any of those things, he was dawdling. His mouth was open, agape, almost as if they didn't tell him he was going to be on a split screen. And it just, at a certain point, it felt almost mean. And so, there's a lot of talk this morning amongst the Democratic Party, a very high circle saying, what now? And the problem is, given where we are in the calendar, I don't know that there's an answer.
I just got off a conversation with a political strategist political scientist rather, and they said the mood isn't gloating if you're a Republican. The mood isn't all around sorrow. I mean, he said when you watched that, you couldn't help but feel bad for Joe Biden. And I had lifelong Democrats texting me last night telling me, hey, I voted for Hillary Clinton. I voted for Joe Biden in 2020. I'm watching this. I have to turn it off. And I cannot vote for Donald Trump, but I cannot in good conscience vote for Joe Biden. What do you think about that?
Look, we already had an enthusiasm gap issue, I think, especially after the Trump conviction. And we saw that in the New York Times Siena poll a couple of days ago. We saw it in the Q poll that dropped where he was picking up national steam. And what you're seeing is the Republican Party was solidifying behind him in a way that you're not seeing the Democratic Party do with Biden. And I think after last night, what your friend or what the person who was just on expressed to you is, I think, exactly what's happening. I think people are saying, I cannot in good conscience go pull the lever for Joe Biden. And we are still a country that needs to have a leader that is cogent, coherent, can lead. And after last night's performance, that was all, thrown in doubt. And I agree with you that I think that there is even the cover of the New York Post, notorious tabloid. I was waiting to see what kind of sort of gratuitous shot they were going to take. And this morning, their front page was like, this is sad. And I'll tell you, the feeling amongst the Democrats I'm talking to is also a lot of anger, because there are a lot of people in the Democratic Party who feel that the people in the White House and people like Chuck Schumer and others, cabinet secretaries, have been lying to Democrats at very high levels about what's going on behind closed doors.
You're a Democratic strategist. I am curious what you think, how this happened, because I've been getting the same sentiment from Democratic voters who do feel like they've been lied to. There was a Wall Street Journal report out just a few weeks ago saying behind closed doors, Biden shows signs of slipping. And Democratic lawmakers and others came out against that very harshly. On display last night, we saw a president who couldn't form a coherent sentence together, was losing his train of thought, couldn't fill the gaps of a full response. So how does the Democratic Party regain this trust of these voters?
Well, and one of the things that people are really grappling with and trying to square today, Brittany, is the Joe Biden that we saw at the State of the Union, who was energetic, who was on, who delivered a few punches, who was able to hold his own, who looked physically good. Where was he last night? And the Biden camp has spent the last, I think it was 8 days in Camp David preparing for that debate. And then for him to show up, and I mean, even just little things, performative things, like his face looked pale. Like, why, why didn't they put bronzer on him? Why, little things that all put together, it just gives off this impression that he is behind the scenes exactly who the Republican Party has been saying he is, and the Democrats who have been saying that's not true, that's not true. And the only way I think that Joe Biden could come back from this and the Democrats can regain voter trust is if he goes and sits with the New York Times, he does a 60 Minutes interview, he's out on the campaign trail. But the question is, can he? He hasn't been doing those things. Can he do those things? And that's ultimately, I think, going to be the decider between now and November. If he's got any shot, he's got to show the American public that what happened last night was an aberration. And I just don't know if he can.
What do you think happens now? Because Democrats seem like they are presented with two paths. Do they go full force behind Joe Biden? That's what Gavin Newsom was suggesting last night. He did acknowledge, hey, yes, it wasn't a great 90 minutes, but we have to rally around behind Joe Biden. It's been a great 3.5 years. Or do they choose somebody else? We're less than 2 months away from the DNC.
Well, I'm told, although I haven't seen it yet, that the White House has issued an official statement today saying that he is not dropping out. And so, if that's their initial off the cuff, who knows what can happen in the coming weeks in the lead into the election. What I wrote about in the Daily Beast was I think the only way this could be accomplished is if former presidents Bill Clinton and Barack Obama sort of link arms and go to him and go to Dr. Jill Biden and say, your contributions to this country have been immeasurable. You won back the White House from Donald Trump in 2020. You will be long, honored, but it's time to put country first and step aside. And I think absent that sort of a coordinated move and appeal both to him and to his wife, I'm not sure he is going to step aside. And those are his delegates. He won them fair and square. So unless he releases them, there's really no move at the convention. Like a coup would be really impossible. And so I think that the only way it could happen is if in advance of that, the party elders get together, he says, okay, he does it on his own terms. And then, the party picks somebody who agrees to maybe serve for one term because, there are a lot of young guns who want to go for it in 4 years, who believed that whether Biden or Trump won, they would get their shot next time. So, the party coalesces around someone, and I don't know who that person is, who says, I'll just do it for one term. And then everyone else can have their shot. But it's a lot of moving pieces on a chessboard that, doesn't really feel like there's enough runway in order to achieve any of that.
And absent of that, let's say Biden wins, or let's say Biden continues to run rather. Before the debate, Biden and Trump already neck and neck in the polls. Trump had the slightest hair of a lead. But do you think if Donald Trump is the nominee, Biden is the nominee, do you think Biden beats Trump? Is there a way that happens?
I think if the election were to be held today, there's no doubt that Trump would be president of the United States again. The thing, and we've talked about this before when I've come on, the thing about the media cycle and this sort of crazy new world that we live in is that, in 4 days, there'll be a new press cycle. The problem with what happened last night is that it reinforced to the American voters their greatest fear about Joe Biden. And I'm not sure you can wipe away that impression. And if there is not a second debate in the fall, which if I were advising Donald Trump, I would say, why would you debate him again? I would say, forget it. I'm not doing the ABC debate. And so I'm not sure there will be another debate in the fall. What can Joe Biden do on his own proactively, and what does Trump have to do in terms of missteps in order for Biden to really get back in play? And so I think you're really then going to see both sides trying. Biden's got to put points on the board and Trump's got to play error-free ball. And that would be the only way that this thing can turn itself around.
Let's say you were consulting Biden, you were consulting the Biden team. Today, what do you say to them? How do they lessen the impact of the debate last night?
Again, look, the only way that you can, knock down perception is with reality. And so they would have to show, Biden would have to go out. Biden would have to go out. He has to do an interview. He would have to take some tough questions. He would have to look good. He would have to sound smart and cogent and coherent. And again, if they're not doing that, I think there's a reason they're not doing that. And so that's the bigger question mark. I think they're probably hoping next week is July 4th. Let's let a few days go by. Let's let the heat come down and then sort of recalibrate. But absent that, he's got to go out there.
Today, after the debate, we're talking about not what he said, but how he said it. We saw a debate last night where Donald Trump did plow through many falsehoods, a lot of them going undetected, not rebutted by President Biden. President Biden came across as someone who was incoherent, who couldn't finish his sentence, and that went on for 90 minutes. So what do you think this is signaling to both our friends and enemies abroad?
Well, and I'm glad you brought up that point, because while Biden clearly lost the debate, I'm not sure that Trump won the debate. I think Biden lost the debate. And I think the American people lost overall, given that these are our options at this particular stage. There were no heroes last night. But if you are a world leader, and I was saying this last night to friends while we were watching the debate, like if you are a world leader who wants to go after America, I would be looking and be like, now's our chance. Let's take our shot. Because it doesn't appear that anybody at the top is home. And that is a scary, scary thing internationally. So I think that that's another consideration Americans are going to, have to grapple with as they make the decision. And again, I'm going to go back to the anger I think that Democrats are feeling, that they were lied to by people very high up in the White House, by senators, by cabinet members, all because those people wanted to retain their own power and their proximity to power. And what are the repercussions as a result of this? Losing an election is one thing. Opening ourselves up on the world stage to potential threats is another.
The anger is palpable in that respect. And this was already an election that there were going to be fears of low voter turnout. Do you think that if Biden is the nominee, there is this feeling of anger, not enthusiasm surrounding him? Do you think this is going to impact House and Senate races too?
It could. I mean, look, you always see a trickle-down effect. And if you see Democratic voters, traditional Democratic voters stay home, then I think the odds of us picking up the House drop dramatically. And the Senate, because of the calendar year that we're in, not every Senate seat is up every 2 years because it's a 6-year term. We already weren't favored to hold the Senate. So I think that Senate is probably gone. And I think that if you've got traditional Democratic voters who are not enthused to sit home, you are going to see a down ballot impact that's going to cost us the House again.
And aside from how they were saying it, let's talk a little bit about what was said last night. Do you think either Trump or Biden laid out a really good, cohesive plan, a vision for how they're going to run the country should either of them win a second term?
No, I mean, that was the worst part. There was a moment at the end that was almost comical where they were arguing over golf, and Trump turns to Biden and says, "Let's not act like children, Joe." And I'm like, this is, these are our options. And so, I mean, to the extent that they engaged in any conversation, it was mostly about things in the past, and it was bickering. And I really didn't hear a vision from either of them. But the truth of the matter is, given the split screen and given how Biden looked, I don't even think people could have focused on the dialogue because everyone was so struck by the image. And, someone told me once, you can tell if someone's good on TV if you mute the television and how they look and how they come off. And last night it's almost like the sound didn't matter.
So what are you looking for next when it comes to the DNC's in less than 8 weeks, the RNC's a little sooner? What are you looking for between now and then, and looking out the debate in September?
Well, again, I'm not even sure there's going to be a debate in September. But if there is a debate, if Joe Biden is lucky enough, if Joe Biden is still on the ticket in September and Joe Biden is lucky enough to get another shot, then he is going to have to be the Joe Biden that we saw at the State of the Union and not the Joe Biden that we saw last night. And between now and then, this is not something that can be accomplished through surrogates. This is not something that can be accomplished through ads. It's going to have to be him out taking questions on the trail. And we're going to have to cross our fingers and say a prayer that Trump does what Trump does, goes out, says things that are alienating, that are crazy, that make him come off unhinged, that remind people that it wasn't, as much as we tell ourselves we were better off 4 years ago, putting COVID aside, than we are today. And you see that reflected in all the polls when you get asked that question, that it was unsettling to have a president who was, tweeting at dictators, and that it was unsettling to have a president who was such a loose cannon, and that there is some good in predictability and stability. And so I think that we're going to need to see both of those two things happen.
And as a Democrat, let's say Biden is off the ticket, who would you want to see as the nominee?
I can't even engage in that like fantasy football. The problem is the Democratic Party is a big tent party, and Kamala Harris being vice president sort of puts everybody in a little bit of a box, because if you pass her over, and she would be the heir apparent, if you pass her over, you could see a real rift within the party. And if Black women or women in general sit home, they are the backbone of the Democratic Party, then you are going to ensure a loss. And so, again, I think that this would have to be some sort of move by the party elders who get behind somebody who we know can win, who will go in and say, I'll just serve one term. But, listening to people banty about Gretchen Whitmer and Gavin Newsom, these people, it's like, okay, well, if it's Gavin Newsom, do we want to have a referendum on San Francisco and the current state of what's going on in San Francisco on the national stage and make that the face of the Democratic Party? Like, these things haven't been thought through, and they're so complicated, and we're so late in the calendar. And so, look, I would love it if Barack Obama could run again. He can't. I don't know what the answer is, but hopefully between now and the next few weeks, unless Joe Biden goes out and proves that last night was an aberration, we're going to need an answer.
Melissa DeRosa, per usual, I appreciate you coming on. I'm already looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks so much, Brittany. Great to be back.